I go straight up on the pre-taped opening.
In the long run, it's working for people. The British Columbia Development
Good.
Corporation, we're working to help you work. A provincial government corporation working for the people of British Columbia.
And now, the Toyota dealers of British Columbia perform for you the mass Toyota jump. Look at him go. Who is that dealer? Could it be Mark Andreessen? Or Erwin Smith? Or Bill Dockstetter? Or Roland Bolio? Who is that Toyota dealer?
Oh, what a fun bunch of guys. Toyota. BCTV. Our best dish show.
Morning. The fate of the entire British Columbia lumber industry, and perhaps that of the Canadian wood products industry, is now in the hands of the International Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. The report, the recommendations, the countervailing bond in lieu of a tariff may be released sometime before midnight tonight. On the telephone from Washington, D.C. is BCTV's Harvey Oberfeld. Harvey, what can you tell me right now about the prospects of bad or good news for British Columbia?
Well, I would say, Jack, it doesn't look very good at all. I think that what we're going to see tomorrow is we're going to see exports of lumber from British Columbia hit very hard with a subsidy brought in by the Americans, a subsidy duty. And I think there are a number of points on which this argument has been based. We might win some, but we're going to lose some, and the ones we're going to lose are going to hit hard at our industry.
This is because of the competing American softwoods industry, which say that Canadian lumber is unfairly subsidized by various governmental methods. Is that right?
That's right. You have some people down here who support the Canadian position, namely the people who are using our lumber to build housing and other construction. Of course, they don't want to see our prices go up. But the American lumber industry, which feels that it's being hit by unfair competition from Canada, has contended that there are no less than 32 different ways that Canadian timber exports are subsidized by the federal government.
Now, tomorrow's decision, or tonight's decision, or whenever it's released, is not the permanent one. When does the permanent decision come?
Well, this tomorrow is just, or late tonight, is what they call a preliminary finding. Then there's another finding in July after people have had a chance to respond to the one tomorrow.
But even
the point you have to realize is that as soon as this preliminary finding is handed down tomorrow, that if they do have a finding for some sort of subsidy on the Canadian side, then Canadian exports must be covered by a bond equal to the amount of the subsidy. In other words, that the amount of extra duty that would be applied has to be posted and bonded before any lumber can come into the United States. So the effects would be felt right away.
Understood. The industry whispers here that $5 a thousand they could handle, $7 a thousand barely. Anything over that would be disastrous. Now, what about the actual timing of the release? When will we know?
The word here in Washington is that the actual report will be handed out sometime very early tomorrow morning, probably about 9. And then early afternoon here in Washington, the Canadians will be responding, and the Americans will also be responding to this report.
Okay.
The actual timing, of course, is still being worked on. They have to have the decision made by midnight tonight, but that doesn't mean to say that they have to release the report by midnight, although there is some effort to get that out tonight.
Okay, Harvey, let's keep our fingers crossed and be a little partisan and hope it's good news. And you'll cover it in spades for me tomorrow morning.
Sure will, Jack.
Thanks, Harvey. Be in touch later. And also on Webster today, the man who not so long ago had his TV hit squads racing around the country, arrogantly and arbitrarily tearing down satellite dishes because common people were watching them and they didn't come through the CRTC. That man, of course, is Francis Fox, who has some explaining to do to us this morning about his incredible athletic prowess in doing double somersaults in policy. Apparently now kneecapping the CRTC and giving us an open skies policy and the hell with Canadian content. And for interest from Eastern Canada, we've got another Tory candidate. Not just Gamble, not just Wilson, not just Brian Mulroney coming up, not just Joe Clark, but the tiny, perfect candidate, Mr. Huggability from Toronto. What's his name again? Does anybody know him out here? David Crombie.
What I want to tell you today is that when you walk into the Ottawa Civic Auditorium one fine day in June, you'll find me there asking for your support.
But first for the man who does the somersaults, Francis Fox, after the break. A very simple question to Francis Fox, the Minister of Communications. How could you have been so wrong when you've been running around the country threatening people, hitting them over the head with clubs, tearing down the satellite dishes, and now you come out in a new image, open skies, do what you like, chop the feet from the CRTC. When did you get your information on your stroll to Damascus? What was the blinding light that made you see common sense, Mr. Minister?
Well, it is obviously a change in policy. I won't deny that, but it's a matter of degree, because we've always been highly favorable to satellite technology being used in Canada to make programming available to Canadians. I can think of BC TV, for instance, being made available throughout Canada by the Anik B satellite, actually gratis, free of charge, courtesy of the Department of Communications, Government of Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fox. Thank you very much, Mr. Fox.
And then through the CanCom licensing system, which has brought a number of programmings right throughout the country. So really, while it is a change of policy for individuals, we've always been dedicated to the use of satellites to bring programming to Canadians.
But suddenly you've virtually removed all restrictions, and perhaps is it true that 5 or 6 years down the road, cable TV will be killed by your policy when we all have our direct broadcasting satellite receiving dishes?
I don't think so. I'm actually betting on cable. I think cable, with the policy that we've brought forward now, can meet the competition of the dish. It's true that the dish will be used extensively in the areas that are outside of the major urban centers of the country, outside of the main cable centers of the country. But I think that cable, by bringing both programming, all the programming that the direct broadcast satellites can bring to you, and on top of that, all those new non-programming services that we've been talking about for years and will soon be available, like telebanking and teleshopping, medical alert, burglar alarm systems and all that, that they'll be able to meet the competition of the dish and survive.
Don't run away from me in this magnificent liberal style debating and diversion tactics. Is it not a fact that at one stage your policy was so awkward that you were ripping down satellite dishes on the top of apartment buildings in Burnaby and telling people with the same satellite dishes up north, it's okay, we won't touch you, you're supplying a service, acting as an agent to protect the cable at any cost?
Well, there was a lot of flexibility in our policy, Jack. Yes,
How do you spell flexibility? M-I-S-T-A-K-E?
No, not quite. It really was a question of saying that we realized that for people living in the more remote areas of the country, people living in northern BC, from northern BC to northern Ontario, the only way for them to receive adequate programming was through the dishes, and we turned a blind eye. But now we've opened both eyes and we've said, let's legalize it, let's encourage Canadians to go that way if they want to go that way. And the market eventually will decide whether it's cable, whether it's dish. But I'm still betting on cable.
Francis Fox says no more Nelson touch. Everybody will now be legal whatever they do. What will be illegal under the new Fox satellite dish policy? Anything?
Well, what's legal now is first of all, the ownership of dishes by individuals for their own purposes. Up to now, if you wanted to buy a dish, you had to have a license. But it was a bit of a catch-22 situation, because I wouldn't give you a license if you applied for one.
That's right.
But now we're saying you no longer need a license. You don't have to go through the bureaucracy. You don't have to file an application.
You have bent to the inevitable.
Well, yes. Why not?
Why not? Now, what about if I'm now a hotel owner, I can put up a satellite and show all the programs to my customers?
That's right. If you're an individual, you can buy a satellite receive dish and pick up whatever you want.
If I operate a pub?
If you operate a pub or an hotel, you can bring it into your hotel or your pub, as long as you display it to your patrons and not go into the business of making a redistribution. If you're a condominium or apartment building owner, then depending on your size, you will need a license from the CRTC. And the idea there really is that since there are condominiums in this country that have 2,000 to 3,000 units in them, and their cable operations are even smaller than that, well, if you want to be fair to those cable operations, those condominium owners should be able to bring in only the same signals that a cable owner can bring in.
In other words, the nub of your policy is still, in some way, to protect the cable operators with their investment and their CRTC licenses.
It's to ensure that there's no unfair competition in the system. If I have to tell a cable operator that he can only bring in 10 or 12 US signals, then I should tell the big MATV operator who's in competition with the cable operator that he too is subjected to the same regulations. But as far as individuals are concerned, once again, as far as commercial establishments like taverns or pubs, then let them bring in whatever they can pick up off the satellite.
Now, I want to get that quite clear. As long as I'm distributing it only to my customers, I'm okay.
That's right.
If I'm a small apartment block with only 8 cable units in my building, I'm all right.
Well, we're suggesting to the CRTC in our policy that they should exempt small operations completely, that they be treated the same way as individuals.
Define that small operation, though. That's the point. You're going to have to define one.
That's right.
And if it might be 50 units and 51 will be charged.
I would expect it would be a couple of hundred units.
A couple of hundred
to really take out a lot of the smaller operations.
Now, what about Canadian content? Is it not a fact, said Webster, who loves to be on CanCom himself? We get phone calls from California and whatnot. Is it not a fact, however, that the satellite will eventually kill all of the networks with the direct broadcasting satellite in this country, in our skies?
No, I don't think so. I think that Webster is a good example of what quality Canadian programming can do. If you've got good Canadian programming, they'll meet the competition.
It's very difficult to get ratings on a direct broadcasting satellite, is it not?
Oh, yes, it would be. Yes, sure.
Now, what about control of CBC? It seems the control of CRTC. Have you taken all policy in relation to Canadian content out of the hands of CRTC?
No, definitely not. What we've done in our new broadcasting strategy is basically there are 3 thrusts. One is to tell individuals they can now own these TVROs, and you know, sure, that's a change of policy, but I don't apologize for it. I think we listened to what Canadians were telling us over the past couple of years.
Sure, if you made a mistake, you're big enough to say you made a mistake, aren't you?
Well, you know, that's a policy that has existed in Canada for the past 10 years, including my Tory predecessor, David MacDonald. He enforced that policy. I've changed the policy because I think that in this new environment, that policy no longer makes any sense. And I don't see why, because I enforced it for a while, that I should be stuck forever and ever in enforcing something that doesn't make any sense in this environment.
To be serious, though, Canadian content will find it very difficult to live, will it not, on your open skies policy?
Well, that's the other part of our strategy. We're opening up the system. At the same time, we're putting money into program production in Canada to help the Canadian program production industry, as we help other industries, to produce quality material. And we're telling them, if you produce quality material, then you'll be able to survive in this new environment. It's an environment where the market will decide who's going to survive. We think that the Canadian program production industry can indeed survive and produce quality programming.
This is to help the CBC survive in the plethora of satellites.
No, this is essentially a private sector thrust. We're saying there's going to be a fund amounting to $60 million. The people who have access to it are the independent program producers in Canada. So it really is a private sector thrust.
And is the CRTC still going to nominate the precise Canadian content at the times of day?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
For
Canadian broadcasting.
Is the Cabinet going to tell the CRTC what it wants, or will the CRTC have freedom to do as it wishes?
Oh no, the CRTC will have very wide discretion. What Cabinet will have is a general power to give general policy directives to the CRTC, but nothing specific. I mean, at some point we could say, for instance, looking at the history of TV in Canada, that it's desirable that people in the northern areas of the country have access to programming of the same kind and quality as people have in the southern parts of the country.
But isn't that
and that's the type of direction we could give.
The $60 million subsidy from the taxpayers you're going to give to independent programs, correct?
It's an incentive. It's an incentive because...
You call it incentive.
Yeah,
Can I still call it a subsidy from the taxpayers?
I don't think it's a subsidy because it's going to be, in many cases, a loan. The type of product we're going to be investing in, that the taxpayer will be investing in, is going to be commercial product, and hopefully there's going to be a return on that. And if there's a return, it's not certainly it's not a subsidy. But why is it, you know, that in Canada we say we're willing to put money into just about every kind of industry? Well, you know, the cultural industries are industries too. They rank number 7 in their contribution to the gross national product year in and year out. Culture is an important industry in Canada, and governments should help to ensure that it continues to develop.
If only people would watch it on Canadian television.
Well, look at the
That's the problem.
Jack, look at the good programming. You've got very good ratings.
I'm not culture, Mr. Fox. I'm
but
news,
you're Canadian.
information, and opinion.
You're Canadian. That's a
people
Canadian
are.
content.
More with Francis Fox and his 60 million for the, not the CBC, for independent programming, and the question of censorship after the break. Francis Fox, and Francis Fox has received nothing but bouquets these days. Let me read just a little snippet from the Globe and Mail. I want you to feel welcome on the West Coast this morning. But soft, what light through yonder policy breaks? She had them explain the flip-flop this morning. Mr. Fox, upon whom the futility of resisting the inevitable has been slow to dawn, shows signs of comprehending the sweeping outflanking movements of technology. It's very nice, isn't it?
That's very kind of them, yes, yes.
And there is a certain smidgen of truth in it, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there is, of course, and I won't deny it. We have changed that policy, and I'm pleased.
How many officials are you going to fire? How
Well,
many officials are you going to fire?
Well, why shouldn't we change policies? It seems to me that as governments in general, we sort of get married to our policies, and we want, we either survive or go down with them. But if a policy doesn't fit anymore with a new environment, surely we should be big enough to change it. And that's what I've done.
And as a matter of fact, I'm going to speak to the Prime Minister this week and suggest you be made the new Energy Minister, because that's a place where we need someone to whom the soft dawn will light. The soft light will dawn. Now, back to serious business. When you were asked about porn on television, you said you couldn't do anything about Playboy, porn or not, because the CRTC was in control. Do you have to mend any acts for this?
For the Playboy?
Change in policy? No, change in policy, no.
I'm sorry.
No amendment in your overall act?
No, not for that. Not on content.
Okay. Now, you are now in control of content. Will you
I'm not in control of content. I'm not in control of content. Really, I have the power to issue broad policy directives to the CRTC, but I can't say Webster's show shouldn't be on or Webster's show should be on it from such a time to such a time. Under the Broadcasting Act, the people who have responsibility for program content are first and foremost the license holders. They're the people who should exercise that responsibility. And then the CRTC has a general power of regulation and supervision over content.
Can you say to the CRTC, Webster is showing porn, disgusting porn? Clip his wings.
No.
Can you say that the first choice?
No, I can't.
Will you have a broad government policy on porn?
What I could say well, there is a broad government policy on porn.
It's against porn.
It's the criminal code. There's a section of the criminal code that defines obscenity as undue sexual exploitation, and if a film meets that test, then obviously you're subjected to a charge under the criminal code, which I don't think any one of the pay TV operators will want to face. So on the whole, I don't think that they will go as far as showing obscene material. But our concern was that basically the first major announcement to come out of the pay TV operators, and the pay TV system was set up to benefit Canadians in point of view of viewing, to benefit Canadians in terms of money going back into the production industry in Canada, instead of flowing out, as it does in the film business, right out to Hollywood, right out to the majors to pay American stars. We wanted some of that to come back into Canada and to allow our own industry to develop.
Understood, but there's one great free enterprise danger that they face. They might be wiped out by the direct broadcasting satellites and by the competition from the 20 or 30 cable channels we'll be getting shortly.
But they understand the system they're operating in. They all came forth, asked for licenses. Mm-hmm. They knew the type of environment that they were going to be operating in, and they feel they can be successful. And I wish them luck in being successful.
Yeah, it's competition.
It's competition.
Cable TV is going to hurt, though.
Well,
eventually.
That's the type of, and that's why we brought up this policy. We know that at the moment there's 50 U.S. signals on satellite. We also know that by 1986. The Americans will be launching their first direct broadcast satellite, that satellite, which will have about 3 channels, will cover 90% of the populated areas of Canada. That's new competition for broadcasters and for cable operators. And that's why we feel our broadcasting strategy is giving a signal to the industry saying you have 3 years really to make sure that you can compete with this new product.
Your technical experts, in whom I don't place any great reliance, must have told you when we're going to be able to buy the small $250 dishes with the automatic satellite finder. When?
Well, I think that the small dish at $300 is about 4 years away.
4 years away?
I would say 4 years away.
And then we'll have real open skies.
Well, then a Canadian will be able to pick up whatever he wants to pick up at a relatively cheap cost.
It's always been really the same. I mean,
Well,
what was
sure.
the difference between you trying to protect the television signal from a radio signal? I mean,
Well-
your policy was crazy, wasn't it?
No, I don't think it was crazy. I think there's a time and a place for these policies. Basically, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to ensure that we keep on having in Canada a Canadian broadcasting system, a system that is responsive to Canadian needs. The Americans wouldn't put a signal up on a satellite to cover northern Canada with news and affairs covering this country.
That's true.
You know, we need our own Canadian broadcasting system. And on the whole, we have a successful Canadian broadcasting system. We don't have to repatriate the Canadian broadcasting system. It's owned by Canadians, and it's operated by Canadians. It creates employment in this country. But what we have to do is to try to increase quality, and I say quality Canadian programming, because Canadians will only watch something that is at least as good as what they can watch on another channel.
I remember well, for instance, that you told me your favorite program was The Beachcombers.
Yes, I've watched The Beachcombers a number of times.
Have you looked, for instance, at the Playboy channel?
No, I haven't.
Why don't you look?
Because I don't have a dish.
Can you get the Playboy channel in Ottawa?
No, well, maybe you can if you own a dish or if you subscribe to one of the...
Haven't you even seen one of these dirty movies so you can respond to people like me?
I haven't seen the Playboy ones, no.
Would you look at one before you come back the next time? Just want to get...
I'll try to be accommodating.
Just try, okay. Now we're going to... Oh, the Applebaum A-Bear. Applebaum A-Bear? Is that right?
Applebaum Hébert, yes.
The recommendations are to gut the CBC. Eliminate all commercial stuff, gut everything except news and public affairs. Do you approve of that report?
No, not in that respect. I think that they have many good recommendations in many respects. Their overall analysis of the situation for broadcasting is pretty much similar to the one that I have in my own broadcasting strategy. But the model they've adopted for the CBC is basically the American model. Now, they're taking the model of what NBC and CBS do. That is, they produce news and public affairs, and they contract out for everything else. But they're going further than the American model. They're saying that the CBC should even get out of public affairs. Now, I say it's not...
That's stupid.
Well, it's not a realistic model for Canada.
How about eliminating all that expensive production of NFB? That's not a bad idea.
Well,
You could give that money to the independent producers.
Well, what they're
instead
saying...
of the NFB bureaucracy.
Well, the NFB produces some pretty good films, too.
Did.
Well, it still does. They've got a couple of films up for Oscars this year.
Oh,
and
that's right, and they're causing all the trouble with our American friends.
Well, I think it's a bit embarrassing to American
How
friends.
are you getting
what's,
on with the
going
Americans on broadcasting policy, with the border stations?
Well, in general, we're getting along very well. I was in Los Angeles over the past weekend, met a number of people from the American side, and they feel that they like our policy much better than our previous policy. On the border broadcasting issue, well, that's an issue that continues to rise. It goes back to the amendments of the Income Tax Act.
One
a few
last
years
question
ago.
before we go to the phones. Camera number, which one? Give him a camera. Camera 3. Have you a message for Pat McGeer to say that McGeer was on the side of the righteous and the correct all these years when you were scoffing at him?
No, I can't say that. He was partly right, but the position of the BC government through Mr. McGeer was basically that let's open up simply. Our position is fine, we open up, but at the same time we have a strong Canadian programming thrust. There was no Canadian programming thrust on the part of any of the provinces. They would simply have turned the system over to the Americans. And we say, no, that's not good enough. We don't want an Americanized broadcasting system in Canada. We want an open system, access to the best that the world can produce, but also choice of quality Canadian programs. And you know, when we talk about all these signals coming in, this technology works both ways. This technology will allow us, satellite technology will allow us to broadcast into the United States. Our own Annex C2, which we're launching in April, will have a southward tilt to it as opposed to the northern tilt of Annex C3. Will cover massive parts of the United States with potentially excellent markets for Canadians.
Mr. Fox, congratulations on your open skies policy at long last. We might get Jake Gaudaur on the phone now. We want to get Jake to give him a nag after the break. And then your calls. On the telephone from Toronto, at my request, is Jake Gaudaur, the Commissioner of the Canadian Football League. Mr. Gaudaur, Mr. Fox is here. He can hear every word you say. Give him hell.
Well, I don't know that I'm prepared to give him hell until I have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Fox and understand what it is that his department has now done or proposes to do. And I suppose I would open by asking Mr. Fox what has happened in the last 2 months since the time back in November and December he made a statement just as firm as the one he has made now, that the activity whereby certain drinking establishments were commercially exploiting stolen property is now, in his view, seen to be quite acceptable.
Okay, he puts it to you that you'll allow people to steal their commercial product quite acceptably and damage the Canadian Football League.
Well, we made some very strong statements in the fall to be as helpful as possible to the Canadian Football League, because we think the Canadian Football League is an important institution in this country, and I wish them well. But the point is not. The point is rather that who are the people who should be enforcing property rights in this country? If someone is stealing Mr. Gaudaur's signal, and I'm not saying that some of these dishes won't be taking a signal that doesn't belong to them. To my mind, that's a problem for the Canadian Football League and for Jake Gaudaur. Now, there are two solutions to the problem. One of them is a technical solution. Perhaps he can scramble his signal and in that way eliminate the theft of his signal from through bars and taverns and all that. And the other solution for Mr. Gaudaur is the possibility of taking legal action to sue people who are stealing his signal. It's just a question of, if BCTV, if your program, which is put up over the air, is copied by someone and resold somewhere else, is it my job to protect your property? No, it's not. It's
Mr.
BCTV's problem.
Mr. Gaudaur, what the minister's saying is that he's opened the chicken house. People can have at the chickens, and if you want to stop them from stealing your chickens in the time of audience, you got to sue them under the Copyright Act. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, well, Mr. Fox knows very well, because I believe Mr. Fox is a lawyer, that any approach legally in respect of copyright would have to be judged under copyright laws that were written before television was invented. He knows very well, I'm sure, that the chances of going that route are very slim, and I just disagree with what he just said in basic principle. I believe it is a government responsibility to pass and enforce any laws which protect a person or an organization's right in Canada to produce and sell a product that conforms to the laws of the land. To me, it's absolutely unthinkable in this day and age that an agency of the senior level of government in this land would abdicate its responsibility in this regard and, in effect, by public policy or as a statement, endorse the commercial exploitation of a stolen product. To me, it takes the same kind of courage in this regard that, as an example, the provincial governments have had when they have enforced seatbelt laws. And it occurs to me to ask the minister whether or not he is concerned about the difficulty in enforcing such a law, if that was to be made the law.
Well, I recognize, obviously, that it's CFL's property. They have the game, they have the rights to that game. They sell it to a broadcaster, they sell it to someone who packages it and puts it up on the satellite, and in turn, once it's on the satellite, they sell it to a variety of people across the country. Now, with the technology as it exists today, if you have an open signal as opposed to a scrambled signal, people can tap into that system. I'm not saying that I approve of that tapping in of the system, but I'm saying that enforcing property rights is essentially a matter for the owner of that property right. If you write a book, for instance, Mr. Webster,
sir, that you refer to, that would be great if we owned a network. We have to deliver our signal by two networks in Canada, two national networks, neither of which we own. Can I ask you, would you support the CBC taking such steps as are necessary to scramble their signal onto a satellite and provide decoders to receive the signal?
Well, I think that the people who are buying the signal, that it should be part of that contract. We're going to this whole new field of technology. This is happening in all of the countries.
But you're not going to do it. He has to do it.
He has to do it.
He has to do it.
That's right. I'm not.
It's on your back. You get no sympathy or help from the minister this morning, it would seem to me, Mr. Gaudaur.
We ask the government to do everything for everybody at all times. It makes no sense. If we're talking about enforcement of property rights, you should go to court, establish your case, and sue for damages if people are taking your product. Or on the other hand, ensure that the new technology uses devices that are available. Scramble the signal, and it can only be brought down by people who own the decoders.
Fox, I read in your policy statement a lot of great sanctimonious statements which refers to reinforcing, quote, reinforcing the cultural heritage of all Canadians and, quote, ensuring the Canadian culture thrives. In my opinion, of perhaps far greater consequence than destroying the Canadian Football League is the tremendous harm you're going to do to the Canadian television broadcasting industry by fragmenting the audiences, by making up to 50 channels available from U.S. satellites to make them available to Canada. And I read in there, and I'm sure your response to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that to offset that, you're going to supply $35 million of taxpayers' money to the film industry to produce programming which presumably Canadians would watch choose over Canadian programming, assuming that that would be the case. It seems to me from any information I have that for that $35 million of taxpayers' money, you can produce 34 hours of programming, and that may be wrong. But let me tell you, as opposed to that $35 million of taxpayer money being used to produce 34 hours of Canadian programming, the CFL last year produced 240 hours of Canadian content produced in Canada by Canadians that didn't cost the taxpayers a cent. Are you going to jeopardize, are you prepared to jeopardize all of that?
No, obviously not, and I obviously hope that the CFL continues to not only to survive, but continues to expand, to develop. But I have a twofold response to what you're saying to me. First of all, on the question of the number of signals being made available. Well, because of the new technological environment that we are now living in, and that's essentially the satellite technology, you can't build a wall around Canada to keep these signals out. You can't do that. It's impossible. So we're being realistic. We're saying there are signals available. Our response then is to say, fine, Canadians want to have access to those signals. They can have access to those signals. We live in a free country, essentially. But we want to ensure that there's a strong Canadian broadcasting system at the same time. And that's why we set up this fund. You mentioned $35 million. The fund rises very quickly to $60 million. It's essentially in the hands of independent Canadian production houses. It's a private sector thrust. To have access to it, you have to find another $2 in the private sector. That means $180 million of new production in any given year.
Let me ask you something with regard to that. I find that very interesting, and maybe it's the solution to this thing. Given the fact that even if it goes to $60 million a year of taxpayers' money, which would produce 60 hours of programming, would the Canadian Football League qualify, given the fact that they produce 240 hours, and not only 240 hours, that is a type of programming that Canadians want to see? I hope you're aware that 9.2 million people watched the Grey Cup on television this year, 3 million more than has watched any other single program in the history of television in Canada. And one other thing, which exports to a greater degree than any other Canadian programmer, 140 hours of Canadian culture to the U.S. each year.
Good stuff. A simple, short answer from the Minister. Are you going to kick in any of that 35 or 60 million to help the CFL in its production?
No, he's doing very well by himself. He doesn't need me. And
that's totally
Canadian broadcasting is a success story as far as public affairs, news, and sports are concerned. The areas of weakness are drama, variety, and children's programming.
Thank you very much, Jake. I got your remarks about the sanctimonious policy. I've been doing my best to demonstrate that myself this morning. Thanks again, Jake. I got to go after the break. Francis Fox, Minister of Communications. You've held that job for quite some time now.
3 years now.
3 years. That's a record for the Liberal cabinet.
Time enough to change a few policies.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Fox.
Good morning.
I was wondering about this $35 million you're speaking of. Will this money be allotted amongst the provinces?
Well, yeah. Well, not allotted amongst the provinces. What we've done is we've signed an agreement with the Canadian Film Development Corporation. They administer it on our behalf. To have access to it, you have to be an independent producer or a private sector production house, and you have to have a distribution agreement with a Canadian broadcaster.
It'll go to the same old gang.
No, it won't.
Sure
And
it will. The Eastern Media Mafia and a few chosen people on the West Coast will pick up the little share of the pie and produce some crappy
And
stuff.
right in that agreement with the CFDC, I've indicated my very strong desire, the government's desire, to see to it that these funds are allocated to all of the production centres across the country.
That means BC will get its 10%, $6 million.
BC, the good producers in BC will have access to it, and like in other parts of the country, the bad producers in this part of the country, or be they from here or from Toronto, won't have access to it, I hope.
I hope it's not the same old CBC fringe mob that gets it. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Webster and Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox, are you looking forward to the fiasco going to be happening in the near future here in regards to the pay TV decoders, one of which I held in my hand yesterday? The total cost for the parts in any retail electronic store, $3.32.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure what your question is.
He's saying, do you approve of the fact that people can beat pay television by buying $4 worth of parts and making their own decoder?
No, but the same answer as I gave to Jake Gaudaur before. That's, it's up to the cable companies to scramble their system to use a sophisticated scrambling system. They haven't, in general...
They can change the scrambling every day.
They can change the scrambling, but up to now they have not used, in general, in many parts of the country, a sophisticated scrambling system. It's up to them to protect their property, not up to me to protect their property.
Mr. Fox, there's only about a half a dozen ways a signal can be scrambled, and anybody with an oscilloscope can decode this.
Well, he's made the point, though, and he's given you a clear answer, and the answer is that's the problem of pay TV
operators.
Sure. If people can cheat them for $3.32, too bleeding bad.
Let them change their signal. Let them change the system.
Go ahead to Francis Fox.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Fox. Good morning, Jack. Mr. Fox, you said that approximately 4 years from now that we'll be capable of having a very inexpensive dish, say a 3-foot dish. What I'd like to ask you or tell you is that our satellites right now, we operate on a 4 gigahertz system, okay? Now, the Japanese have a small dish out, and they're operating on a 12 gigahertz system. That's a KU band. Now, we're going to be very, very limited on our channel selection with these small dishes. When they do come out, you say 4 years from now, I say longer. But with the operation on the 4 gigahertz band right now, you're going to need a lot bigger dish 4 years from now to pick up a limited...
You say it's not practical. Do we need 12 gigahertz?
We have 12 gigahertz.
We have 12 gigahertz.
Anik B has both 6.4 and 12.
Thank
and
God
Anik C3 and Anik C2 are all exclusively 12 gigahertz.
Thank you, sir. Right to Popular Mechanics. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack?
Yes.
Yes, I have two things. The first thing I'd like to say is that I am pleased with Playboy.
Good.
Second of all, a question for Mr. Fox. Will there be, and when will there be, radio broadcast for pay TV?
Radio broadcast for pay TV? I don't quite understand what you mean.
What I'm saying is that if I'm watching a show on pay TV, will I be able to listen to it in stereo?
Yes, well, this is a question that C-Channel in particular is discussing with the CRTC at the moment. So I don't have an answer for you this morning.
But CRTC would still have jurisdiction over that.
Yes, definitely.
Go ahead, please.
My question to Mr. Francis Fox is about that stereo sound through CRTC. First of all, Mr. Fox, you are an elected representative, and you do have some control over the CRTC. In my opinion, it's just a bureaucratic red tape schmozzle. Now, can you tell the Canadian people when they're going to get the product they're paying for? And if not, I think it's just false and misleading advertising.
No, I don't have control over the CRTC, and I won't have control over the CRTC. In the type of society in which we live, we give certain powers to independent agencies that act in a fashion independent from government. And if there's one area above all others that it is important to keep this principle, it's in the field of broadcasting. We don't want state-run networks in Canada.
Except for the CBC.
Well, that's run by the management of the CBC itself. I don't tell the CBC what type of programming to put on.
No, but you pick the president, you pick the chairman of the CRTC, you have broad policy control over everything.
Well, let me give you an example. The previous government picked the present chairman of the CRTC.
Well, that was
he's still there. He's an excellent chairman, but that's an indication of the fact that we don't approach broadcasting in a partisan way in Canada.
Sure enough, because he was a guy who'd never even watched television before he was appointed, as I recall.
Quite a magnificent person. He's done a great job.
I'm sure he is. Maybe you could have him over to watch the Beachcombers along with you. Prince George, go ahead, please.
Saying we need more Canadian programming on the air. Well, I've been watching Canadian TV a lot, and the way I look at it, we got enough informative TV, such as Jack Webster, which I enjoy myself, and other programs. But the entertainment program aspect is not up to par to the Canadian programming.
Whose?
If they want more people to watch Canadian programming, it has to be up to par or as good as the American
Sure,
stuff.
that's true, and I think that we're on the way to doing that. Just last year in the United States, Canadian films picked up $200 million at the box office. The most successful films in the United States last year were Canadian films. It shows that we can do it. We can meet the competition. We can meet the competition of the Americans. We can develop an industry which is as good as as the Australians, for instance, have developed. But we have this tendency in Canada of only looking at the bad things we produce. You know, for every good program that the Americans produce, there's literally hundreds of them that finish up on the cutting room floor.
And most of the stuff that CBC and CTV runs on these sitcoms is repulsive stuff.
Well, most of it is American schlock, if you pardon the
That's right, American schlock. That's a measure of the desire for good Canadian content. We all watch American schlock.
Well, I agree with you on the Canadian movie aspect, because I watched Changing last night. I've seen lots of other Canadian movies. The movies are up to par in lots of cases, but the programming, such as I Married a Klondike and other programs such as that, are not as good as the American programming.
Yeah, but that's why we set up the fund. We really want to give Canadians the opportunity to work in Canada. You know, who was the producer of MASH? Burt Metcalfe, a Canadian. Look at Norman Jewison, you know, a world-class producer. Where does he produce? He produces in L.A. Why? Because we don't give him the opportunity to do it here.
Yes.
With this broadcasting strategy, we're going to be giving them the opportunity to do it here. We'll do it here. We'll produce quality programming here, and I'll bet that we can meet the challenge and sell some of that programming to the United States. And that means jobs for Canadians. Canadian camera crews, Canadian scriptwriters, Canadian artists, the whole gamut.
You've just seen an extensive interview with a totally revitalized Francis Fox, who has done a couple of somersaults, is now fit, and is all for open skies and Canadian content, and we can take over the world.
That's right, Jack.
My thanks to Francis Fox. Next on man who wants to take over Canada, in a small way, David Crombie. After the break.
I'm in this race. I'm going to stay in this race. I'm going to go full out, and we are going to win it.
Deadly serious now. I interviewed Michael Wilson the other day, the very coy Michael Wilson, who refused even to believe the headlines in the Globe and Mail that he was going to have a press conference in Toronto this morning to run for Joe Clark's job. So we've got Joe Clark. We've got a fella called Gamble. I've never heard of in my life before. We've got Michael Wilson. Brian Mulroney's coming out here at the end of the month, so he's going to declare himself for the leadership. And then there's a man, David Crombie, former mayor of Toronto, apparently very well known and very liked in Toronto, but how the hell will you do in the rest of the country?
Well, I think pretty well.
Why are you doing this? Why are you going through this masochistic exercise when the biggest gun, I suppose, is Clark?
Well, first of all, I think I can make a contribution, and secondly, I think I can win it. They're the two reasons.
Well, the Toronto base isn't all that big. You've got to be popular in the rest of the country. You're out here, of course, this morning to show your face to delegates to get together your claque, which you want to take from BC to the convention in June. Is that correct?
I think that's a good, short way to put it. I came out to see some old friends, to make some new ones, and see if I can get an organization in British Columbia that would help me win the convention.
Can you name me your local man in BC? So we've
Yes, I can. Bob Henderson.
Who's Bob Henderson?
Bob Henderson's in the insurance business. I can leave the telephone number with your office so that anybody who's interested can give him a call.
Anybody who wants to send money, we'll pass
and
on
ideas.
the number.
Well, listen, all good ventures are made up of people, ideas, and money. We need all three.
A couple of simple questions, then I'm going to give you the full stage to yourself. How much is this campaign going to cost you?
We're not sure, but it's in the order of $250,000 at the minimum. Some people say $500,000. I know that Michael Wilson at one point was talking about $750,000. So people don't really know, but it depends on how much you think you're going to spend. But I think we're going to be in the order of $250,000. I've never supported deficit financing, so I'm only going to be spending what I get as I go along.
What you get from contributors?
Yes.
And of course, you'll know each and every contributor.
Yes.
None of this nonsense about not knowing who's backing you.
No, I think you have to know that.
Who'll give you the most money?
I don't know. I have some people here in Vancouver, I have some people in Toronto, some in Montreal, some in Winnipeg, and we're selling, for example, what we call diamond pins. They're diamond on a pin, and we sell them for $10 or $100, depending on what you want to make the contribution. We're asking businessmen, small businessmen, we're asking people who are simply interested in buying a piece of the Conservative Party.
All right, now, who is David Crombie? Camera 3. Put on the wee red light. Wee red light, yeah. Who is David Crombie? Why should he be leader of the Conservative Party? I'll leave for 5 minutes. You tell him.
I can talk now for 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yes.
Well, I think, Jack, let me talk to you, because I'd rather talk to you, okay, because it's a little easier for me to talk to you, right? First of all, I think Canadians, a vast majority of Canadians want to change the government.
Hear, hear.
Okay. Secondly, I think the same vast majority of Canadians want to vote for the Conservative Party. Thirdly, what has to be done for people to, I think, support the Conservative Party is 3 things. First of all, the Conservative Party has to be united. We have been fighting amongst ourselves for 20 years, and the price of that has been that we've been in the government for only 7 months of those 20 years, and we've deprived the Canadian people of an alternative. I think I can bring people together. I think my track record in public life, in Toronto in particular, but in other parts of the country, federally, within the Federal Party caucus, I've shown that I can bring people together. Secondly, the Conservative Party needs to expand its base. It needs to open the doors and windows of the Conservative Party and let people from all walks of life in. I think that I can do that. Thirdly, we need to excite people about the future of this country again. We have been lying like water on a plate for the last number of years, moaning and groaning about our plight, and yet all around us, we have still the best of God's bounty. It seems to me we have to excite people again about our own future. You know, Jack, we are 6,100 days to the 21st century. And we're going into that century, whether we like it or not. We have to learn again that in order to stay ahead, we have to keep ahead. We have to be progressive again. And that's why we have to excite Canadian people. Those 3 reasons are the reasons I'm running. I think I can do that job better than anyone else, and that's why I'm running.
How old?
I'm 46 years of age. I'll be 47 on April the 24th.
Oh, you're an Aries?
No, I'm a Taurus by 3 days.
You're a Taurus?
Sure.
Oh, I'm an Aries.
Are you?
You can almost join the club. How's your health?
Excellent.
When did you have your heart attack?
3 years ago, 3.5 years ago.
Fully recovered?
It was just after the government was lost. Fully recovered. I went. Some people say, "You take that seriously?" I certainly did. Actually, I went to the doctor after I decided I wanted to run. I went to the doctor, and he said, "You are as fit as a lumberjack." So here I am.
Okay, you're physically fit.
Yes.
You don't smoke?
I don't smoke.
You drink moderately?
I drink moderately.
Wine alone?
BC water.
BC water. There was another question on that. Smoke, drink. What was the other question? French.
On a scale of 10, I'm so far 3.5. I started 2 years ago on French because I didn't have any level. I went for a month immersion at the first level. I did so because I think it's very important to be able to speak French.
Yeah.
I think it's also very important, at least people understand that you think it is important, that you care about it. I've taken lessons since that time. I go down to Saint-Jean, Quebec for a week at a time whenever I can afford the time. I got to keep at it. They're going to carry me out of this old world bilingually.
Now, it's said in the public print, you know, the keyhole papers like Fotheringham and Lynch and whatnot, they're still alive, the pair of them, aren't they? They're still writing?
Yeah, I hear. They're mentioned in the dispatches from time to time.
All right. Yeah. It's said that you are a teensy bit bitter because Joe, while he made you Minister of Health, didn't put you in his inner cabinet.
I've never been bitter, I don't think, in my life.
Were you in the inner cabinet?
No, and I should have been, but that didn't make me bitter.
Just forthright about it.
Well, certainly. I said I should be in the inner cabinet. That was not agreed upon, but that doesn't make me bitter. Bitterness costs too much.
That's right. I always try to get people to say negative things. So tell me what's wrong with Joe.
I don't think there's anything wrong with Joe. I think he's done a good job, and I've made an effort to try and...
But he's not the right man.
Well, I think he's the second best man in the race.
But if I were to say to you, he's not the right man, you would say, that's correct, he's not the right man.
Except for me. He's probably a good man.
He's number 2 to you.
He's number 2.
If you're the leader and you become elected Prime Minister, will you put him in your inner cabinet?
Absolutely. I think he'd make a first-class inner cabinet person.
How long were you mayor of Toronto?
6 years.
You didn't build a half shell. Nathan built the half shell, didn't he?
Nathan Phillips built the City Hall in 1964. I was mayor from 1972 to 1978. I might say, by the way, that I was Nathan Phillips' chauffeur on weekends when I was a student, so I knew him quite well.
That was when you first got the smell of politics, as a matter of fact, was it not?
He had, Nathan Phillips was a great man. He had 90 sets of grandparents, every ethnic group he was from.
He was from. David Crombie. Some policies from David Crombie next, and your calls and questions. There might be some people who know David. A few people here from Toronto.
I would think so, and some people who are not.
After the break. One very interesting remark you made is unity in the Tory party. That's almost impossible. You've got this incredible death wish for cutting each other's throats.
I don't think so. I don't think it's a function of being a Tory. I think it's, first of all, Jack, a function of losing. You look at political parties anywhere in the history of this country or across the provincial parties, those which lose are always having difficulty with fights amongst themselves and questions of leadership. So I think, first of all, it's a function of losing. Secondly, the internal fights in the last 20 years have caused a kind of vacuum where Tories too often have simply dwelt most on those things which divide them and less on the far more general things which unite them. So
because you had the ball in your hands there for that 7 months and then you just threw it away.
We'll get it back in a year.
Okay, Liberals.
Yes.
What are the worst sins of the Liberal government led by Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his henchman Lalonde right now? What are the worst sins?
I think two things. First of all, in the economic world, they have almost totally destroyed the sense of investor confidence. I mean, there's lots of savings in this country. And people, both individuals, corporations, small businesses, have withdrawn their sense of confidence in terms of investing. And that has created enormous difficulties in the creation of jobs. I think, secondly, they have become insular and looked in and dwelt only in Canada on the inside and have forgotten that Canada is a trading nation, that Canada must look to the international world.
Well, the Yanks are giving us a bad time just now.
Absolutely.
Natural gas, lumber,
countervailing
oil,
duties.
You name it, you got it. Well, now, should Lalonde have resigned during the recent hiatus?
Yes. He should have resigned because there is a clear responsibility in our system of government that even if the minister himself is not directly aware of the circumstance, if his officials have created the sin, the only way in which the system can operate is for the responsible minister to resign. If you don't do that, then you don't have the parliamentary system of government, because the premise, the basic fundamental democratic premise of our system of government is that we can only hold the minister responsible. So even if he was not directly involved, he should resign. Darcy McHugh did it in the province of Ontario. He did not directly involve himself in the matter that's caused a problem.
His brother-in-law's property.
His brother-in-law's property. He was not even directly involved in it. But an official in his department created an indiscretion which was unacceptable, and he resigned.
In this case, it's quite clear. Gillespie, the ex-energy minister, goes within the guidelines to Mickey Cohen, his former deputy, and says, hey, I want to subsidy this.
It's the result. It's really the reflection of a government that's been in power too long. It's now run more and more like a kind of old school Thai club. It's not a functioning government that's really.
But even if you were premier, in there clean as a whistle, you know, determined to wipe out patronage, determined to open the books, as Jean Piggott did when you were in power.
That's right.
To patronage, can you control this monstrous, powerful civil service?
It's a powerful. Yes, I think you can. First of all, it seems to me that, and I've had some experience as Mayor of Toronto on the matter, there has to be a clear understanding within the bureaucracy that two things. One, that the final responsibility and authority rests with the elected people, because they're the only people that the people can get at. And secondly, that the responsibility of the bureaucracy is to serve. To serve. You have to keep drumming that in people's heads. I mean, those are sort of old-fashioned cliches, but they're fundamental to the way in which our system of government operates. The people who are on top are the people who are elected by the people, and people who work as public servants are there to serve.
Would you scrap the national energy policy if and as and when you could?
Yes, I think it's been a disaster. It has caused, I talked a moment ago about investor confidence. I can't think of one single thing that caused more difficulty with respect to the destruction of investor confidence. And now, of course, in the light of the current situation of world prices with oil, it just shows not only was it confiscatory in terms of property rights and the destruction of property rights like that, but also it was based on an understanding of the market which was nowhere near any kind of precision of accuracy.
All right, one last bit in the leadership. We'll say that we know that Clark is going, we know that this fella Gamble's going, but he's just a nuisance candidate, is he? John Gamble?
Well, he has a point of view.
Pocklington's a laughing stock, he won't go.
They have a similar point of view.
Okay, so we've got Clark, we've got Wilson, we've got Crombie, we've got Mulroney, who's going for sure.
Yes.
That leaves...
John Crosby.
Oh, yeah, he's going for sure, too.
Yes, he'll probably be gone, he says, by the Ides of March, which I think is March the 15th.
The middle of March, isn't it? The Ides of March, we checked that the other day.
Right.
Nobody knew here what Ides were.
Lunch on the 16th of March.
That's yeah. Okay, Crosby, that's a lot. No, Davis.
I don't think so.
Lougheed.
I don't think so.
So in order of preferences, Clark, who got 66.9 at the doings.
Right.
But can now win with 51%.
Yeah, he could yeah, that's right.
You're going to have to make yourself very popular in the West if we count at all.
Yes, I agree. I think I can win for the Conservative Party if we're united, if we expand our base, if we excite people about the future. I can win 65 seats in the province of Ontario. But in order to form a government, we need the West.
That's the key. Anybody who can get 65 seats. All Joe's got's 32 out of your 101 MPs.
We need support in the province of Ontario, but we also need support in the West. So what I'm trying to do is combine that strength in Ontario with strength in the West.
Does anybody know you in Alberta?
Sure.
What do you think of David Crombie as leader of the Tory party and therefore ipso facto quadrate demonstrandum? How's that for
That's
it's
Gaelic.
Prime Minister of Canada after the break. Now, I don't want any pins, P-A-E-N-S, of praise for David Crombie this morning. Just get at him. He's from Ontario. He wants to be Prime Minister of this country. He thinks he's better than Joe Clark. Can you swim?
Sure, I can swim.
You've got Joe beaten on that.
Oh, really?
You didn't know that?
I didn't know he couldn't swim.
Don't you read Fotheringham?
But he's tall enough, he can probably
walk
some distance.
Up the middle of the pool.
I had to learn early how to swim.
You would drown in the shallow end.
That's right.
Do forgive me. I'm a little hysterical this morning.
That's all right. I have that effect on everybody.
Go ahead to David Crombie.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Mr. Crombie, as far as I'm concerned, the only person who does stand a chance of beating Joe Clark would be William Davies. However, you think he's not going to run. If Davies doesn't run, where do you think Davies' blue machine will go, behind you or behind Joe? I think that'll be the deciding point.
Well, if I could, 2 points. First of all, I don't think that Bill Davis will be going, as I said. And secondly, I don't think that he's going to employ his machine in any significant way behind anyone. The machine, the blue machine, I think, is far more an idea than it is a constant ongoing reality. It's made up of people who will make their own judgments. My experience in Toronto and Ontario has been that the people who are involved in, close quote, the blue machine, will make their own judgments.
If I were to follow Davies in Ontario, I think I would follow his leadership if he said he was going to support one or the other. Therefore, the blue machine will come into play.
He will have some influence on some people, but I don't think he'll do that, by the way. He has indicated that he is supporting Mr. Clark. That's been his constant assurance, so that I don't think he'll be making any further statement other than that.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to ask David that if he becomes Prime Minister, what is he going to do towards ending the inequities in our income tax system, which permits the oil companies, the banks, to virtually walk away unscathed when it comes time to pay income tax? Now, oil companies, they've always got their damn hands out looking for more money from the federal government for subsidies, for this, for that. They pay nothing back into income tax practically. Then I got to turn around and pay top buck for their product at the gas pumps. Banks, this year I'll pay over $6,000 towards my mortgage, and I'll pay off $85. The Bank of Commerce pays somewhere in the neighborhood of at 18% income tax bracket. I pay 35 to 40%.
Good points.
First of all, with respect to oil companies, I would hope that we will continue and indeed rationalize and make more sensible the incentives that oil companies have in order to increase our capacity to produce the resource. One of the big problems has been that the incentive program for oil companies, particularly through the National Energy Policy, has been so confused, leading to no predictability for investment opportunities, that indeed we suffered as a consequence. The federal government's incentive program has been an abysmal failure and a boondoggle for some people because it has not done what it intended to do. So I would hope, when it comes to the oil companies, what we'll be able to do is have a better incentive system, one which will allow for Canadian companies to produce oil and create Canadian jobs. When it comes to, secondly, the banks, I have to say this to you. There are a number of people, including myself, in the House of Commons who held the view that in the past 3 years, the banks had been making profits which seemed to be, in relative terms, very high in terms of what was happening to the rest of the economy. Consequently, there was established a committee at the House which dealt with the question of bank profits. The result of that study, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning it to you, the result of that study was that bank profits were not, in terms of their particular business, high at all, that they had other long-term obligations with respect to both domestic and international financing, which explained it. And that, by the way, was an explanation which was satisfactory to all three political parties.
Yeah, what about this business? There's the heart cry of a Canadian. $6,000 he makes in interest payments this year and knocks $85 off his mortgage.
Yes.
I mean, nobody can help that, can they?
No, if you're talking about his own reform for personal income tax for individual people, let me say two things which I think are really important. First of all, the income tax reform is now almost not understandable by ordinary people. And it doesn't have to be written that way. It's written by accountants and lawyers, which have to put in the content, but it can be written by people who can still put together a good English or a good French sentence. So I think we should reform it so people can understand it. Secondly, the progressive income tax now over the last 30 years has become so warped and woofed by sort of barnacled, by little things being stuck onto it, that it's no longer either seen as fair or understandable. So I think there are two reforms that need to be done. And one is to again look at the progressive income tax and make sure that it's fair. And secondly, look at the actual form itself and make sure that it's understandable.
What about mortgage deductibility, one of the planks of the Tory
yes,
platform?
A good program. It's a good program.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Crombie.
Yes, sir.
Sir, this is not a put-down. You did do your job as a short-lived cabinet minister and even now as an MP. But the main topic here today is leadership. Now, I've watched you, I've listened to your speeches and watched your media events, and I've observed personally that while Joe Clark is said to do funny things with his hands, that he walks funny, that his dog can't swim, etc., your own tendency to nervousness and fumbled words of your speech, plus the fact that your eyes don't seem to stand still even for a moment, to me, at least, is less charisma than we've so far experienced with Mr. Clark. And charisma being, as far as I'm concerned, not amounting to a hill of beans. But it's a man's honesty and decency that goes with me first. But it's the public has to not only...
Fair enough, fair enough. You just called the candidate shifty-eyed. That's not fair.
Well, I guess
you do not resemble that remark.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think my eyes probably reflect the thoughts passing behind it.
Quick-witted.
Yes.
You got to come out here to be insulted.
And well, actually, I never thought there was charisma was only a question of physical appearance. I mean, some of the most charismatic people that I have met, charisma shines from the inside, not from the outside, and that's why I've always noticed that Jack Webster had charisma.
Kind of fat charisma.
A chubby kind of charisma.
Chubby charisma, that's it. Let's take a break. Are you enjoying this?
Oh, listen, I'll
Do you
come
want
back
to
tomorrow.
stay?
I'll come
You want
back
no, stay. Go ahead to David Crombie, putative leader, is that the word? No, potential leader of the Tory party if he can beat Joe, Mulroney, Crosby, Epp, we forgot about Epp, Wilson, Gamble.
And many others.
And many others, yes. Go ahead to David Crombie.
Thank you. Is that me?
That's you.
Thank you. Mr. Crombie.
Yes, sir.
I can't even see Mr. Webster is filling up the screen here. But what I want to ask you, Mr. Crombie, I'd like to say the fact that I'm a veteran. I had 4 years of service over there, and I would say that those boys that died over there, they died for nothing, practically, and I'm ashamed of this past government. And what will you do, Mr. Crombie, when you say you haven't made any promises yet, but I would like to hear you say that. I will bring back the Union Jack. I will start on the capital punishment bit. I will bring back the metric system.
Okay, hold on, that's three good ones. Will you bring back the Union Jack, God Save the Queen?
Well, we don't have to bring back God Save the Queen. We still have it. It's the royal anthem, and we have the national anthem and the royal anthem.
Do me a favor.
The Union Jack, I think is still a good flag, and I think the British will keep it. But I think I like our own flag.
So do I. Next question: are you in favor of serious face? Are you in favor of capital punishment?
In two categories only: for the deliberate taking of the life of a law enforcement officer in the exercise of his duty, and secondly, for political terrorism and assassination. I do so took the position 15 years ago, roughly on the basis that the only moral justification, in my own view, for the community taking a human life is in the defense of the community itself. That's the moral justification for taking a life in wartime, and law enforcement officers, in my view, are the soldiers of peacetime. And it seemed to me that was justifiable, but those are the only two categories.
That's what we had in the criminal code before, was capital punishment for those who killed a policeman in the line of his duty or a prison guard.
Well, it's a law enforcement officer.
Law enforcement, that includes a prison guard.
Yes.
And for death resulting from terrorist activities.
Yes. Those are the two categories that I think it's
you put the policeman and the prison guards together in one, and terrorist activities in the next one.
Yes.
What was his third question? Metric system.
Metric system, we should refer to the 1970 legislation, which said that metrification should proceed according to two principles: volunteer and sector by sector. Doing it that way allows us to have metrification at a speed that makes sense to both our domestic market and international market.
Yeah, he was long-winded, but he made a couple of good points, that caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, David.
Hello.
It's your fishing buddy from up the coast. First of all, I want to congratulate you for running. I think you'd make an excellent prime minister. The previous caller covered the metric system. I'd like to know why we couldn't have both. Secondly, was covered on the capital system, but I really would like to know about how you feel about a split vote with the various people that may be running, and are they splitting the vote for Clark? I'll hang up and hear your answer. Thank you.
Just a minute. This is your fishing buddy from Pender Harbor.
Yes.
He must have taken you out fishing one time. What does he mean, a split vote?
Well, let me go to the first question on metric.
He wanted both, yes.
Yeah, we've been metric, both metric and imperial, since 1869. So both are legal. What the Liberal government did was make the imperial system illegal, so that metric became mandatory. We should have both again. It should be volunteer, and metrification, should it proceed in particular sectors, should be sector by sector. In terms of the split vote, I can only assume that what he's talking about is whether or not all of the people who are now running will split up the vote, and Mr. Clark will have the more votes than anyone else, and therefore we split the opposition. I think he means...
no, I think what he's getting at is something that kind of came through with me with Wilson the other day. Wilson is a finance critic, right?
Yes.
Wilson is on the face of it a Clark man. Wilson, therefore, is building up as much support as he can to give him clout if Clark becomes a leader again.
Oh, I see.
In other words, don't you people do this? Don't you? Even if you fail, if you make the best showing, I'd say the second or third guy on the final ballot of the leadership decision, you then have clout to demand a senior position in the cabinet.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, I think that in any conservative government, I would be a good candidate for the cabinet because I have ability and have experience, and I think I would get the job on my own merits. Secondly, I'm in this race only to do one thing, and that is to win it, and I expect to win in the first ballot.
And to win it with unity, without any blood all over the floor.
At the vote on June the 12th, after that vote, we will have a united Conservative Party, and I hope I'm going to be the leader of it.
But regardless of who wins, presumably you will have a united Conservative Party.
Yes, I have no doubt about that.
Mulroney hasn't really got a chance. He's never been in the House of Commons, has he?
He hasn't been in the House, no.
But could you get any seats in Quebec? Could you get any support in Quebec?
I'm going to try very hard. I'm going down to Quebec beginning of next week. I'll be there a number of times throughout the campaign, so I'll be trying very hard to do so.
It's tough, isn't it? Next call, Gibson's. Go ahead from Gibson's.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I have a question for Mr. Crombie.
Yes, sir.
Right.
First, I'd like to say that I know quite a few people who are disgusted with Mr. Trudeau's pseudo-peacemaking role in the world, on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're bending over backwards to facilitate the Americans' hawkish attitudes. And I'd like to ask Mr. Crombie, what would he say to the American nuclear overkillers, potential mass murderers, about Canada's involvement in the impending nuclear annihilation scenario?
Well, I'm not sure exactly or with any precision Do I understand what you're
Well,
referring to, other than the question of our participation in NATO's nuclear defense?
That's right.
Okay.
Defense is the key word there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yes. So
Let me put it even simpler. Are you in favor of the Americans testing the cruise missile in northern Arctic lands of Canada?
Yes, I'm in favor of the testing of the cruise, or indeed any other system that is consistent with our obligations within NATO.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Crombie. I live in Vancouver in the West. What are some of your issues to make me as a Westerner interested in you as the Prime Minister of Canada?
On the West Coast?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the West Coast.
Okay, first of all, I think it's a general point, but I think it's worthwhile me mentioning again that the recreation of trust and confidence for investors, I think, will affect the West Coast as well as any other part of the country. Secondly, one of the things that I've been talking about in other parts of the country as well as here yesterday was the importance of Canadians seeing themselves as part of the international world again and not simply always inward looking. When I come to Vancouver, I see a brand new Vancouver coming over the hill, because it seems to me that many people, not only in other parts of Canada but also in Vancouver, have seen Vancouver sort of the end of the train track, when in fact it's really the crossroads of a new world. I see three cities that are going to dominate the Pacific Rim. I think those cities are Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Vancouver. The Vancouver and British Columbia generally, but through Vancouver is, I think, going to be a global center for the Pacific Rim. It's resource-based, it's Pacific-oriented, and it's now becoming rapidly one of the world's leaders in the new knowledge and information explosion.
Okay, pretend I'm following him for a moment. We've only got 20 seconds. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had fruit and dry toast and tea. I'm a frugal person.
Certainly. What do you do for sport?
I run 3 miles a day.
Every day?
Every day.
Regardless?
Well, almost regardless.
Today, did you run?
Today I didn't run, I had to walk.
You have to run tomorrow.
There's a lot of hills in Vancouver.
My thanks to David Crombie, who is not, I repeat with all my authority, not shifty-eyed. Not shifty-eyed at all. David, best of luck. Can I say that? Of course I can. I'll be back after the break. Well, it's a pretty big day in Vancouver and British Columbia tomorrow. First of all, the Queen arrives in the Britannia. Secondly, by tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we should have some of the details and some of the decisions on this countervailing duties problem with the United States. So we'll try and cover bits of both tomorrow with Webster at 9 a.m. precisely. Francis Fox and his open skies policy on Check at midnight.